It is the night of September 18, 1987. A scrapyard owner named Dever Alves Ferreira is standing in his garage in Goiânia, Brazil, holding a handful of powder that glows blue in the dark. Not the blue of neon, not the blue of a flame, a deeper blue. A blue that seemed to come from inside the material itself, steady and quiet and wrong. Dever called his wife. He called his brother. He called the neighbors. Children pressed their faces close. One of them, a little girl named Lida, reached out and touched it. Nobody in that garage knew what they were holding. Nobody knew that the powder glowed because it was undergoing radioactive decay. That every person who touched it, who breathed near it, who let it rest on their skin, was absorbing a lethal dose of gamma radiation. And nobody knew that this material had been sitting, unsecured, in a derelict hospital building 2 miles away for 2 years. That multiple government agencies had known it was there. That a court had issued an order to protect it. That a letter warning of a cesium bomb had been written and ignored. What happened next would contaminate nearly 250 people, claim 4 lives, force 112,000 to be screened for radiation exposure, and rewrite international nuclear safety law. And it all began with a single institution that locked its doors, drove away, and never told anyone what it had left behind. Goiânia is the capital of the state of Goiás, a city of about 1 million people in Brazil's interior, built in the 1930s as a planned capital, modern and orderly by design. By the 1980s, it had a functioning medical infrastructure, including several private clinics offering cancer treatment. One of them was the Instituto Goiano de Radioterapia, a licensed private radiotherapy clinic operating out of a building on Rua 57 in the Aeroporto neighborhood. For years, it treated cancer patients using a teletherapy unit, a machine that delivered targeted beams of gamma radiation to tumors from the outside. At the core of that machine sat a sealed capsule, 93 grams of cesium-137 chloride, a fine silvery powder packed under pressure inside a stainless steel cylinder. The IAEA would later describe the source as having an activity of 50.9 terabecquerels, enough to deliver a lethal dose of radiation within minutes at close contact. In 1985, the move to new premises across town. They took most of their equipment with them. But the teletherapy unit, the machine with the sealed cesium source inside, was left behind. Not because they forgot it. Because a legal dispute between the clinic and the building's owners made removal complicated. A court in Goiás had acknowledged the abandoned radioactive equipment as early as September 11, 1986, and had ordered a security guard posted to watch over it. The guard was not always there. On May 4, 1987, less than 5 months before the accident, Saura Taniguti, director of IPASGO, the state civil servant health insurer that held the building's title, used state police to physically block a team that had arrived to remove the source. An opportunity to end the hazard was turned away at gunpoint. Later that month, Carlos Figueiredo Bezerril, the owner of the clinic, wrote a letter to IPASGO President Lício Teixeira Borges. The letter warned explicitly, in writing, of what would happen with the cesium bomb sitting in the abandoned building. The letter was received. It was not acted upon. September 13, 1987. The security guard does not report for duty. 2 scrap metal scavengers, Roberto dos Santos Alves and Wagner Mota Pereira, enter the derelict building. They have done this before at other abandoned sites. They are looking for sellable materials: copper wire, steel, aluminum. What they find is the teletherapy unit, heavy steel with its rotating head and what looks like valuable metal components. They do not know what it is. They begin to dismantle it. By early evening, they have loaded the rotating source assembly onto a wheelbarrow and taken it to Roberto's house. That same night, both men experience nausea and vomiting. Wagner visits a clinic on September 14th. He is told he has food poisoning. September 16th, 1987. 3 days after the theft. Roberto uses a screwdriver to try to open the source housing, to get at the metal components inside. He punctures the aperture of the cesium capsule. The powder inside begins to leak. The glow that Roberto sees is the result of cesium-137 ionizing the surrounding air, producing the same blue luminescence that appears around nuclear reactors in water. To a scavenger with no physics training, with no knowledge of radiation, with no context for what a teletherapy unit even does, it looks like something valuable, something remarkable. Roberto sells the source assembly to De Ferreira's scrapyard on September 18th for approximately $25. That evening, De notices the blue glow from inside his garage. He brings it into his house. September 19th and 20th, De invites friends and neighbors to see the strange glowing material. People reach into the assembly to touch the powder. Some take small amounts home. The contamination is no longer in one place. It is in multiple homes, on multiple people's hands and skin and clothing. September 21st. An unidentified visitor extracts rice-sized grains of the cesium chloride using a screwdriver. Maria Gabriela Ferreira, Dever's wife, begins showing acute symptoms: nausea, swelling, lesions. September 24th. Dever's brother, Ivo Ferreira, takes some of the powder to his own home. His daughter, Leida das Neves Ferreira, 6 years old, handles the glowing material. She rubs it on her arms and her face. She shows it to her friends. Doctors at multiple clinics treated each case in isolation, with no system to cross-reference simultaneous unexplained illnesses across the city. No alarm connected the cases. September 25th. De sells scrap metal from the yard, still contaminated, to a third location. The contamination has now reached at least 5 separate sites across the city. By this point, Roberto dos Santos Alves has developed severe radiation damage on his right hand. Multiple people around De are simultaneously gravely ill in ways that no local physician can explain. And here is where one person changed everything. September 28th. Maria Gabriela Ferreira, despite her own illness, despite what the IAEA would later document as severe acute radiation syndrome, noticed that too many people in her circle were sick in the same way, at the same time. She connected it to the material. She gathered what remained of it. She carried it in a bag in her hands to the Vigilancia Sanitaria, Goiânia's public health authority. She placed the bag on a doctor's desk. September 29th, 1987, 16 days after the theft, a visiting medical physicist named Walter Fonseca probes the bag with a radiation detector. The readings go off the scale. Brazil activates the IAEA Convention on Assistance in a Nuclear or Radiological Emergency for the first time in the convention's history. 4 people would not survive what happened in that garage. October 23, 1987, Leida das Neves Ferreira dies at the Marcílio Dias Navy Hospital in Rio de Janeiro. She is 6 years old. She received approximately 6.0 grays of radiation, absorbed through skin contact over the days she played with the powder. She is buried in a lead-lined coffin encased in concrete after local residents attempt to block her funeral, fearing the burial itself will contaminate their neighborhood. That same day, Maria Gabriela Ferreira did not survive. She was 37 years old. She had received approximately 5.7 grays. She was the woman who identified the pattern, the woman who carried the source to authorities, and in doing so, almost certainly prevented the contamination from spreading to hundreds more. October 27th, Israel Batista dos Santos, 22 years old, a scrapyard employee, succumbed to acute radiation syndrome. He received approximately 4.5 grays. October 28th, at Milson. Alves de Souza, 18 years old, did not survive his injuries. He received approximately 5.3 grays. In the weeks that followed, the scale of the response was staggering. 275 truckloads of contaminated soil, building material, and personal property were transported to a purpose-built repository outside the city. Residents who had owned contaminated homes were relocated. Clothes, furniture, cars, 3,500 cubic meters of material were buried in sealed concrete containers. Roberto dos Santos Alves, one of the two original scavengers, had his right forearm amputated on October 14th due to radiation damage. He survived. Dever Alves Ferreira, the scrapyard owner who had called his family to see the blue glow, survived the immediate incident. He died in 1994 of cirrhosis, compounded by depression and alcohol. He received approximately 7.0 grays. Dever's brother, Odesson Alves Ferreira, is still alive in 2026. He served for years as president of Avisesio, the Association of Cesium Victims. In 2018, he described the aftermath. It was total pandemonium. No one knew what had happened exactly or who had been contaminated. The victims were not told how to protect themselves. And in a separate interview, he described what remains. I still have pain in my hands, especially when the temperature changes. Sometimes my hands are so hot that I have to put them into the freezer. Nearly 40 years later. The IAEA investigation that followed, published as Report STI Pub 815 in 1988, did not find a conspiracy. What it found was something in some ways worse, a cascade of ordinary institutional failures, each one individually explainable, collectively catastrophic. The Court of Goiás had known about the abandoned radioactive source. It issued an order. The order required a guard. The guard was not always there. Saura Taniguti had used state police to physically prevent the removal of the source in May 1987. There is no documented rationale for this decision in the public record. The blockage stands as an act of institutional obstruction. Carlos Figueiredo Bezerra had written explicitly to warn of a cesium bomb. The letter reached the desk of the person who needed to read it. Brazil's National Nuclear Energy Commission, the federal body with statutory responsibility to track radioactive sources, had received correspondence from the owners. No independent action was taken to verify or secure the source. The 8th Federal Court of Goiás, in its year 2000 judgment, found Ipasgo, the owner, and the clinic physicist all liable. The two scavengers who had physically broken open the capsule were found to lack the criminal intent required for prosecution because they had no awareness they were handling a radioactive source. They could not have known. Nobody told them. Nobody had posted a warning. Nobody had secured the building. Nobody had removed the machine when they had the chance. The Goiânia accident did not disappear quietly. Within months of the catastrophe, Brazil was drafting a new federal constitution. When it was promulgated on October 5, 1988, less than 1 year after the accident, it contained explicit language placing all radioactive energy and source activities under strict federal oversight. Article 225, paragraph 6 of that constitution exists in part because of what happened in a scrapyard in Goiás. In 1996, the IAEA published its International Basic Safety Standards, a framework that introduced, for the first time as binding international doctrine, what is called the cradle-to-grave control principle. Every radioactive source must be tracked from manufacture to final disposal, with no orphan sources permitted at any stage in between. The Goiânia accident is directly cited as the motivating case study. In 2004, the IAEA Code of Conduct on the Safety and Security of Radioactive Sources was adopted by more than 130 member states. It requires each participating country to maintain a national registry of high-activity radioactive sources, knowing where they are, always. Before Goiânia, there were thousands of orphan sources around the world, radioactive devices left in abandoned hospitals, forgotten in decommissioned factories, misplaced in the transfer of building ownership. After Goiânia, the international community understood that ignorance of a source's location is not a neutral state. It is an active danger. Outside Goiânia today, two unremarkable green hills stand at a site called Abadia de Goiás. Beneath them lie 3,500 cubic meters of sealed, concrete containers. The soil that children played on, the clothes that families wore, the material that glowed blue in Devers garage. The IAEA estimates the repository will remain radioactive for approximately 300 years. In 1988, the Brazilian state established the Fundação Lede das Neves Ferreira, named for the 6-year-old who died on October 23rd, to provide ongoing medical, psychological, and financial support to victims and their descendants. In 2000, a court ordered continued compensation payments to the third generation of affected families. Odesson Alves Ferreira, still advocating in 2026, has described showing up to the legislature and leaving with bruised shoulders from supportive pats on the back and empty promises. The glow faded. The consequences did not. If you want to understand another institutional failure that killed 167 people in a single night, catastrophe that the oil industry knew was possible and built the wrong systems to prevent, the story of the Piper Alpha explosion is linked below. Every week, this channel uncovers the catastrophes that rewrote the rules. Because they had to.